All right, thank you very much. I think, when you want to think of generous introduction, that was a generous introduction. Yeah, thanks very, very much. And so before I start, first, again, thanks to Cage for inviting me. I was very much looking forward to this. And, I have not been disappointed, yesterday, the meeting this morning, coming up, all great. So, and then I need to also say that there should be incentive to actually publish slides, in top 5 journal, because this is a lot of work, and I started like 3 years ago, and then I kept, pushing, this is wrong, this is right, this is about okay, and I gave this like several places, and then this development come from a talk that I gave in Kigali, and I don't know if you're ready for this, but it was a keynote to the association, to the African Society of Material Science. So engineers, they invited me and said, yeah, why not? And then I came up with this, and I think this presentation will be reflected into this. So, but then I also meant to mention that in a week, it will be a big celebration for me, because it will be 40 years by the day when I actually organize the second most significant student uprising in Benin. That was a picture of me at those days. Far left. It was actually in the preparation of the uprising. And knowing that democratization in Africa came from student uprising, and and this uprising was the first, then I think there is a reason to be proud to have been part of it. And then sometimes it's good to remember that things are possible, because after that I switched completely to academia. I have been rewarded by this election to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So that's all great. Now, all right. So basically, let me put it. I wanted to sort of kind of develop a narrative about political economy that's coherent, that's forward-looking, that you can actually build on, So, and I started by thinking about some new developments in macro, which, basically focus on total factor productivity by saying development is, at least 50% total factor productivity. And then when you look closely, it's actually state capacity, So in fact, state capacity is most of development. Now, the way state capacity have been defined is like the ability of the state to get things done. Well, and then talk about autonomy, talk about authority, management, resource mobilization. And, originally it was focused on war, on violence, now led to social protection, service provision, and then the macroeconomic management. But I find this definition, this approach a little bit problematic, because first of all, it tends to be too technocratic, right? And also too apolitical and focus on resource generation, You can help, you can extract money from people. Yeah, you are strong, you have capacity. You can't, then you are weak. Well, not that simple. So, and also, I think it's also what I also find problematic is the lack of normative benchmark. There are ways, there are states that on paper are strong, but I don't want that. There are ways, states can be considered on paper to be weak, and I like that. For instance, I might have stronger preference for a state that's liberal, a state that promotes freedom, and it's not just an ideological point. It's actually, if you, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But if you believe in sense approach to freedom and capability, it's rational, to actually value states that promote freedom. So how things are getting done is actually super important, and it's not into this kind of definition. So, for instance, one of the rationale for caring about how things are done is not because of normative reasons, but it's also for practical reasons. Like, for instance, when you have transparency, citizen engagement in particular, then states might be stronger simply because it reduces information cost. People basically will tell you what they want, and you do what they want. You don't have to. There is less information friction. For instance, when this happened, and also something which is going to come out throughout the talk is stimulating the energy, the investment of stakeholders. I wanted to wait to tell this story, but I think I'm so eager to tell you. When I was in high school, something happened and we lost our math teachers for 6 months. Everybody thought we were doomed. But math it was like the top subject. And then because the government mismanaged the school calendar, so the expatriates who were teaching mathematics to us, they all left. So, and then those kids from 12th grade, they meet and they say, let's figure out something. And then we met, and then we say, okay, let's pick the best of us and get him to teach or her to teach mathematics for 6 months. Let's give him support. And let's organize ourselves into groups so that we can actually disseminate whatever we learn in the preliminary session to the whole group. We did about 6 months, and by the way, I was the teacher that was selected at the end of the day. And then obviously it was my best experience, because, and never as many people told me how dumb I was, So get me to work harder to try to and never, for instance, I was as patient with my colleagues, so that we all got it. We were the top high school in the country at the end of the year. So we took charge of the curriculum. And the energy, the determination, the drive, just more than compensated for the massive state failure that took place, which is to mismanage the curriculum. So for me, engaging stakeholders, mobilizing energies and agency is really, 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 really important. So based on this, there are two perspectives to building state capacity. So one is basically, talent. How do you build state capacity? Inject more money, get people to learn to do technical stuff. So what I would call top down. And then there is one that I'm going to promote here, which is based on insight from social psychology, from sociology, and also from sense capability approach, that says that when individual or groups with different objectives come together to find common ground and coordinate to achieve it, that's capacity. And institutions that promote this in a serious way, those institutions has to get more attention. So using this approach, I'm going to say something that we don't say enough, which is, for me is important, is state failure is agency failure. State failure is not simply, some crazy people at the top that does crazy things. It's not the lack of money. is state failure can be seen in part as lack of mobilization of individual agency, like what these kids did in 1977, And besides that, and there is also state. One of the things that we don't pay enough attention to is, the role of politics, but what I would call distortionary politics, into explaining state failure. State failure is not just like, again, not the bureaucrat not well trained and not having enough, don't have a PhD, haven't gone through an RCT, like workshop is like politics is such a like thing that ought to be are not, and we need to know what those things are. But we need to sort of try to think about ways to reduce the gap, and. So what I'm going to be talking about here is that, I'm going to sort of try to promote an approach for state building, or state capacity building, that based on what I would call institutional editing and experimentation. And I will focus on institutions that promote agency, and according to the political theory literature. Institutions, for instance, that generate a sense of social contract between the stakeholders, institutions where deliberation is present, institutions where there's public reason, where, for instance, when you have expert information, this information is presented, is discussed, debated, explained, The institutions that have those features, I'm going to say those institutions can play a major role in reducing different form of state failure. And the reason why I'm going to be focused on deliberation is going to be clear in a second, is because it helps better information sharing, it prevents coordination failure, and also, again, promote agency on the part of citizens. And then, based on my recent talk in Kigali that I mentioned to you, I became even more aware that how scientific innovation can also play a major role in building state capacity. Like once there is an institutional edit that puts states on the right path, science can play an important role in actually maximizing the impact of those institutional reform, and then this goes against this perception that developing countries are should be focused on basic education and getting people to read and write, not enough in terms of how you shape things up socially, politically, by just generating locally, scientific innovation. I'm going to use some science analogy to explain what I mean by institutional editing. So I will take states like organisms with interconnected components. So state capacity arises from complex interaction between these components. So as a result, editing is looking for major macro change based on minor edits to key factors of the organism. The same way you have biological insight on genetic editing, to correct major, dysfunction in organism. But now what is interesting here is that we cannot just experiment, like in biology, we have to use game theory because humans and organizations are strategic. So as a result, you need to factor that in clearly. But then, and this approach is important. First of all, because it's about, not just describing what is and how bad it is. It's identifying distortion and identifying the problem and theoretically sort of explain why it's happening. And then think of adding, subtracting feature of the institution so that you can achieve the goal. I think it's important for many reasons. First of all, because you have this kind of idea of watershed moment. Things are bad, everybody's dying, everybody's whatever, and then there is a critical juncture, and then we go to heaven or to hell. So it never happened. So in fact, it's good politics, right? To make people look like nothing before ever worked. So I'm the leader, and I have this big idea, and all of a sudden we are all in good hands, No, so believe me, I used to say that, but not anymore. I learned that in fact you need continuity, you need to build. That what we are is the result of centuries and decades of experience and knowledge, and it's easier to think of what is not working, where, and then to think creatively about what to do. And I think this is very, very, very important. So, and I mean, I will talk about that later in details by saying, for instance, it's not about basically being stuck with the status quo. It's about accepting the status quo, especially the institutional setting, and understand clearly what is not working, and then find solutions, And and I mean, the other reason, because by doing that way, it's falsifiable, it has clear theoretical prediction, because you can say, okay, I have this edit, all right? So when this one edit can be compared in terms of outcome to the status quo. And then the exercise, the experimentation will consist of seeing what difference does it make to make that edit. And there are a lot of examples I'm going to go through in a second, which is really important. And then when you test, it doesn't work, then you can try again. The same way in the medical profession, for instance, we people do things, but also the same way in many organizations, for instance, people do things, because there might be not productivity, might be low and whatever, and then somebody will come with the idea that why don't we start meeting every Monday at 8, and compare. Yes.
Just to understand, I think this is a useful framework. Who do you have in mind as the institutional editor?
I will come that in a second. I will be, because I will do, maybe before that, for now I'm just presenting the concept, and then I'll urge political economists to suggesting edit, and I would like to teach people who future bureaucrats to have a edit mindset, so that when something is not working, when there is corruption, when there is efficiency or performance, it's not about, like just complaining about the existence of a problem. It's about trying to understand what in the institution design is leading to this and propose a solution. So what I would be suggesting, for instance, I'm suggesting that when we train, people in public policy school, we should train them to be institutional editors, to be innovative, to create, to try things, so that they can make the institution, the place where they live, much better, But I'm going to give some example in a second. So now the question is, how do you actually measure the impact? I'm not going to. So I have a lot of exercises that I've done in which, when the edit is identified, I'll randomly select locations where it's implemented, location where it's not, and then I try to look at the impact. Okay. So by simply comparing what happened in the treatment locations to places with control locations. Now the question is that, how do you, for instance, one of the things that's very interesting to me in this exercise is to look at the intrinsic effect of the institution. Because when you implement an institutional reform in some place, you compare it to the place where it's not, you say, well, it's better here than here because we have more money here than here, we have better outcome here than here. But what interests me is not simply the total outcome, it's the intrinsic effect. Meaning the very fact that you have changed the institution, what difference did it make? You see what I mean? Because sometimes the outcome might be lower, but then when you look at a longer time horizon, because of the mechanism, it's better. So in measuring the effect, one of the things that I'm interested in is how much the institution generates effort, agency in the part of the participants. You see what I mean? Like, let me put it this way. So if the institution is improved because the stakeholders are working harder for it, that's the intrinsic value of the institution. Because again, as I'm telling you all along, mobilizing agency, individual, collective, is a key component of an institutional success, something that we haven't talked about enough. So obviously, you want to do RCT, then you randomly assign and this kind of stuff. But then how do you know, for instance, that people are willing to put the effort? You can measure belief, how optimistic people have become. For instance, in experiments, if you haven't seen the effort being exerted in the treatment places compared to the control, but if there is a belief change where people became more optimistic, people became more excited to some degree, then that's the effect you are going after, okay? So, what is kind of interesting here in the context of Africa in particular is that deliberation is one of the most important assets of African political culture. Like everywhere there is this glorification, for the right reason, I think, of mutual dependence, to a point where, there is a proverb saying, when you are on your own, you are an animal. You are a human being when you are two, like, so you are a human being only in a relationship with other people, this is quite extreme, but, consensus democracy, it's commonplace, and I think that's why I mentioned earlier when we talk about centralization, this is something to keep in mind, that when, centralized states are more in the long term than decentralized, but then there is decentralized states might seem on paper fragmented, but then they have those kind of institutions, participation, engagement, deliberation, that make them very strong, and here is what I'm going to be doing, in the exercises, the application that I'm going to come up with. One is, I'm assuming that I identify the edit that could work. And there is some theoretical, some cultural basis for it, deliberation in particular. So what I'm going to do is let me introduce deliberation in an existing institution and see how it works. Because of the feature that I mentioned earlier, which is, information sharing, coordination, agency, I'll see how it works. And then, so what is interesting here is that, in deliberation, like the players have a more active role. Choices that we end up making, it's something that directly involvement, So I'm going to present 3 projects. One is theory. 2 are experiments, one in Nigeria, another one in Benin. The theory is, in fact, it's about a form of, public good contribution game. So the setting is one in which there are multiple dimensions with public good, and each player has, we prefer different sets. Like if you go to, in real world, you go to, for instance, health council meetings in Brazil, people come and say, here a list of stuff you want, and there are a lot of discussions and this kind of stuff. And try to figure out what the collective preference will be based on this. So now what we are going to introduce is a financing dimension that require voluntary contribution. And, there will be, as in this game, multiple inefficient equilibria where few players contribute. And what we are going to show is that deliberation can improve outcome. Now, basically the mechanism, the centralized mechanism, that will dictate how the good will be financed. And we assume the edit is to have, let's say, a planner who organizes a town hall and ask players to talk to each other and then offer their contribution as a group. So we keep as a black box the exact protocol of deliberation, what players can communicate to each other, but those are open. It's something that you can adjust, something that you can to try to achieve a specific goal. So, and it should satisfy some incentive compatibility condition, and we want, for instance, the resources available, to be able to be used appropriately, to serve the interest of the players. So there are 2 important results. I'm going to share the paper so that you see the details. But one is the result that deliberation brings is a sense of collective agency, that people did contribute. And then we have efficient outcome, So now, again, I'm going to, you will see the assumption we make about the specific form of deliberation that we have here. But then again, we can be super creative, for instance, one key assumption we make is that you have a crowd of people debating, and then you have some kind of, some kind of moderator who collect and aggregate and assign, Anyway, so this one,
is the idea that these people are known to each other beforehand,
yes,
or that they are random?
Yeah, I mean, if they are random, then you need to put more structure. You might have a stage, but in this model, They know each other. The preferences are revealed, and people do these things. Yeah. So I'm going to, and I think in the paper, when you're writing the paper, we are going to inspire. We're going to get inspired by the Health Council in Brazil. That's an example where, this kind of deliberation to implement service provision takes place. Yes.
If you're thinking about the historical, how to do an experiment, so the situation where your ideas might be, if not tested, at least looked upon.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to think of historical situation where others might be looked upon, and I need to go outside Africa and mention the fall of communism, central planned economies, because they collapsed in a very short span of time. And they face the same question, because we are going from the communist totalitarian regime to build democratic society, and we're going from central planned economy to build market economy.
Yeah.
And there is a huge variation. Some countries it worked out, some countries it didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking historically what happened in former East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, all the former Soviet Union of the South, variation might be driven by the fact that the way the transition process was staged depends on how the players were engaged in it.
Exactly.
Because
exactly. So I think, something that we don't do enough, which is to think carefully about institutional design to be able to solve these problems, because you need to come up with a structure that allows people to communicate effectively, to commit, to coordinate, and to commit. Like, for instance, the role that the coordinator plays in this game is very passive. Is you get passive, meaning your preferences, your own preferences, you are more like a facilitator. And one of the implementation, one of the exercise that I'm going to talk about in a second has this feature. And then the example that I gave at the beginning, for instance, where we met and then we make these decisions. There are good ways to make those decisions. There are bad ways to make those decisions. So which one? Because I can think of a scenario where when I met my colleagues, to say we need to do this, they say it didn't work out. I'm not saying the only possible outcome was what we did. But then the question is, what kind of structure, what kind of conditions the institution that we follow should have for us to be able to coordinate? And I think, let me put it this way. The reason I'm very excited about this is actually it gives us more agency, because it says we have problems, we can fix it. We'll try. We'll be anyway. So I'm trying to sell the general kind of approach.
It makes sense to me. I see these collective deliberations. What I remember when communist system collapsed, the level of enthusiasm and collective deliberation which took place in newspapers, radio, televisions, in the collective meetings, it evaporated after 3-4 years. But at the beginning, it was there.
Exactly.
Now, we were willing to engage in.
Exactly. How do you institutionalize it? How do you institutionalize it? How to make it sustainable? It's possible, And so let me give this example, which is, I think, very, very interesting. So it's about local government in Benin. They're very corrupt. And performance is low, procurement processes are rigged. And then every year there is an audit report. Okay. And the typical audit is just given to the mayor, and the mayor, fire people or reward others. And what's going to happen, right? He will fire his political enemies and hire his friends, So as a result, the audit report, despite the fact that if there is an improvement, there will be more transfer. Despite that, the audit never worked. So I went and I proposed that we insert deliberation between when the report is available and it goes to the mayor. So the question then is, would that work? Well, it may work because you have increased agency and autonomy, and crucial information are provided and can help coordination. But then it could also be lead to a decline in trust, because people who are part of the bad equilibrium, people who are in a mafia type environment, when new information about corruption comes out, everybody starts being suspicious about others. Am I next? You know, what do they know that I don't, and so on. So it might be, deliberation might be good, might also be bad in terms of sort of leading to decline in cohesion. So here is what we did. So we organized a public deliberation on audit report, and there is the mayor was not invited, so it's closed door. Only his chief of staff was there as a moderator. And then the first meeting, there is the deliberation over the audit report. And then second meeting, we present a survey on the internal cohesion of the bureaucracy. And the third is survey of citizens from the municipality. And then in the controlled municipality, there is no deliberation. So this is actually some of the pictures of the experiment. And we find that, in fact, the deliberation leads to better outcome in terms of performance. And then there is no significant result in public good provision in the short term. Well, because the measure of improvement was from 1 year to another. So 1 year might not be enough for us to find. But then there is lower probability of payment of bribe. There is higher access to services and better living conditions. So it's positive but not significant. But what is interesting is that it affected municipalities that are mostly below average baseline. So even if the staff, the local bureaucracy was better, it didn't translate in a significant way in overall outcome, big outcome. So, but then what you see as well is that there is a sense of, among the staff, of heightened awareness of corruption, in the treatment places, and trust decline. So as a result, even though performance improve and the organization is going to be rewarded, it led to lower trust and social cohesion, which I hope, if the exercise continued and people continue getting rewarded, then we are going to move from a bad equilibrium to a better equilibrium. You see what I mean? So, and I think this is very consistent with collusion in organization idea of Tirol. That shows that sometimes trust might be a bad thing when the environment is actually very, very bad, because it's an acceptance of a bad, might reflect the acceptance of the bad status quo. Yes.
But deliberation was helpful in the first place because trust was low and there was a coordination problem among bureaucrats?
No. Deliberation was simply to get the audit report on the table and people to talk about what actually happened. Like during those meetings, we have a low score because John doesn't show up at work in the morning, because Jake's friend is the local business person and he rigged corruption, he rigged procurement. Those things came out and people talk about it. Now, you can see that there is a sense in which people are taking ownership of the audit report. People are, they have a stronger sense of what they did to themselves to some degree. And we see that from one year to another, they corrected this behavior. That's why we see improvement in corruption. But then maybe uncertainty, anxiety in what might happen afterwards, and other things might explain why, at least in the short term, the interpersonal relationships between people might be affected. So we see this as some sort of transition from one equilibrium to another. So now there is another experiment which is also very interesting that we did this time in Nigeria, is on education. So typically what happens is that the governor will call experts, they cook something, and then the schools just go for it. Here we say, well, the experts are going to talk to stakeholders in a public meeting, and there will be deliberation through what we are going to call Education Summit. And then we are going to draft a social contract, which is just a summary of the discussion. You see what I mean? We talk about the issues, we talk about this and that, and we agree to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or there is convergence in and we measure the effect on ownership of decision, educational investment, and actual learning. This is basically, some pictures of the event, and it took place in Anambra State. And then this lady was representing the governor. She was the moderator. She's actually a researcher. And then we have the full day of deliberation. Okay, so here is the text of the contract. Contract meaning an informal summary, but it has a symbolic value because it basically say we have talked and we agree on the things. And then what is interesting is that after this, we went to all the schools to present this and then to talk about the commitment of the government. So outcome, there is, in treatment places, you have less learning loss from COVID because it happened during COVID. And also we have improved infrastructure investment, meaning people in the community will not only contribute financially with time to compensate for what the government has provided, but also they go to the diaspora and ask for funding. You see. So this public deliberation was relatively successful in actually mobilizing local agency into the school, and it's not controversial, to say there was a report, we did some work, let's take one day to go over it together and discuss, So I think this, I hope I showed you the promise of deliberation as an institution, as a very effective institutional edit. What I mean by deliberation is very broad. It can take 2 million different forms. But, I'm not, I'm just saying that, particularly in a context like Africa, where it's part of a culture, it's something that should be effective. I can see every government all the time using one form of deliberation or another to be able to reduce distortion, to be able to reduce information friction, to be able to mobilize collective agency. So that's the idea. So now, as I said earlier, more recently, I believe that the combination of institutional edit in general plus science is something that can make state even much stronger. So as a background, we know how important technological progress is to development. And, Abdul Salam, one of the champions of investing in science and technology in developing countries, have said this. And I'm so impressed about his work, because This guy came to Benin, all places. I don't want to look down on my own place, right? But he came and said, I'm going to set up an Institute of Mathematics and Physics in this place. And he did. And then linked this up to Trieste. So, fast forward, last month, the governor of Guinea had a shortage of science professors. They went to Benin, recruited 150 of them because they are there. And
why did he do that?
I have no idea.
Okay.
So we'll find out because there are shortages. So anyway, sometimes I make movies, right? So there will be there will be a documentary on Abdul Salam in a theater near you, shortly. Anyway, so because I find it fascinating that people think that poor places need to be at the frontier of science and technology, and this is something that we don't hear enough. And in this context, this is very, very important. Why? Because when you look historically, science saved the world. Life expectancy moved from 30 to 76, and you have this kind of hockey stick trend in GDP per capita from 2000 to 2018. And the reason is first productivity, meaning science had productivity. That's obvious. But I think less known is how science and technology affect state capacity. First of all, the obvious part is how it's improved the productivity and the efficiency of state agents. You see what I mean? They can move faster from one place to another, they can be more transparent, they can do all these things. That's the top-down state capacity. But then the bottom-up, it's something that we don't stress enough, which is the fact that there is a positive feedback loop between government, science, and society. And that social cohesion and, agency, mobilizing community agency is something that the technology can contribute to, And, for instance, the case is made that Korea, for instance, became more liberal in part because of science. And if you look at in Africa, Julia Cage has this paper with Weather showing that printing press introduced by missionary has persistent effect on social capital, which persists over time. Meaning that printing press, for instance, can shape society in a very fundamental way. And if you take Europe, for instance, the reason why states has become more prone to social protection it could well be because of the advances in medical science and also in transportation. I think this is one aspect that we need to stress enough by saying we cannot just be importing science and technology to developing countries. There should be mechanism for them to generate it locally, and actually it's cheaper, it's more effective, because it's not just to make people work better, it's actually make society better. I'm doing a paper with a colleague from China where they say that part of the Chinese story is the fact that even public officials, they are highly educated. Many of them are top engineers. So when they meet, they don't BS, they talk about what to do, And also, many of the CEOs are highly educated. Many used to be academics. So as a result, when we talk to public officials, they are speaking the same language, So the story of state capacity is also a story of science, education, science in general. If that's the case, then it's such a cost-effective way of promoting development, So I like this quote from Bismarck that made the move from state being just to make war, from state for social protection. So what I try to do here in this lecture that I started a while back is to show that we should ought to think about designing environments that makes people act as if they are not bad people, you know. I read this from one of the Kant's Perpetual Peace, where he said, you know, republic can be created by devils if they have intelligence. So how do we set things up so that they act as if they don't have no evil intent? This problem must have a solution, you know. I like that, you know, particularly today in the world where we are, you know, in Africa in particular, we are looking for, you know, the leader who will solve everything, will bring justice, will bring this and stuff. And, you know, we are saying, calm down, you know, actually let's think about the institutional setup environment that will make people relatively reasonable people to do the right thing. Yes?
And so I think this is very interesting. So here's the thing which so I think this is expecting many of the institutional editors to be more like Leonard Wantchekon rather than Donald Trump. So,
Come on! You put Grandson and myself in the same sentence?
no, what I'm saying is, it's a bit. No, I'm saying the opposite.
Oh, okay, thank you. I didn't know.
No, I'm saying this is it is saying that if everybody had your intentions,
Yeah.
then things would be great. The problem is that not everybody has.
Yeah, I see exactly.
So
Okay.
the point I'm trying to say is not that you and Donald Trump are the same.
No. I'm sorry. No, I'm
saying
sorry.
the opposite. Everybody
Yeah.
is not.
I agree. But then here is what, you know, okay. Let me tell you something. You know, like, the opportunity, okay. I live because I believe that opportunity will come and I'm going to be sitting down in front of someone who will say things are messed up. What do you think we should do? And I'm not going to say, I don't know. You know, I mean, for instance, actually this happened. You know, like, I went to one East African country, and then a good friend of mine who is very close advisor to the president, and called me for a meeting. We were at lunch, and then this guy, do you think your introduction was generous? This guy introduction was far more generous, you know. And then he said, "This is Leonard." No. Okay. And then he said, "This is the president." Okay, talk to each other. And I was like, I mean, come on. I'm not going to say that you need inclusive institution, right? I'm not going to say that. I mean, what are you talking about? You know, I'm not going to tell him to run ICT or whatever. No, he's going to say, "Are you out of your mind?" No. So, but if I can say this, like, do this, edit to local governments, it's not controversial. I mean, come on. If you want to set up education policy, why don't you have this meeting? You know? So what I'm saying is that you can, if you think of something like this that's practical, acceptable, it can work. But also, many of these things, you can incentivize people to make those choices. The reason why it was easy to do the experiment in local government in Benin, because if there is an improvement, this guy will have 10% raise in transfer. I mean, who don't want that? And for the government, even when you are corrupt, bureaucrats, the expected bribe, might be lower than what you get for sure if you do the right thing. You know, see what I mean? So what I'm saying, we need to be obsessed about the opportunity. When the opportunity comes, are we ready? Can I say something meaningful? That's one part of it. The second is that now that we know what to do, can we create an incentives so that people make that choice? That's two. And three, some of these things we can be done in private organizations that provide public goods. You see what I mean? Like, I will use this for my private university, So it's not that every social service, what is done by the government can be done by private individuals. So having this knowledge and leverage it enough is something that has value. But I think the bigger picture message, which I think is very important, is that it's time that, there are two set of stuff. You have, like development, whatever, with platitudes and say, by year 2030, we'll all be fine, stuff. Like, I listened to, the last World Bank annual meetings. It's all about whatever, So, like empower young people, like bring whatever, women to entrepreneurship. But at the end of the day, it's about state capacity. How do you do it? No, they're not interested. They don't even talk about research and development, So, and then the other part is the activists who they think that you have to darken everything. You have to show that everything is bad so that you can mobilize people for something. If we develop a culture that, you can have better political selection, we can have all these things, but in terms of policy, in terms of institutional setup, there needs some continuity. And we need to know what is so that we can improve it. We need to understand where the problem is so that we can improve it. So I think, when this is very, 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 this is super, super, super important. So this is the measure, And again, as I said earlier, the mindset is to turn political economy into more prescriptive. You see what I mean? Many people in development, they will say, we did all this 20,000 RCT, the world did great, and then political economy constraint. And I said, no! What do you mean political economy constraint? Political economy is an enabler. Political economy is what makes it work. It's not a constraint. It doesn't have to be. It's as if politicians are not intrinsically good or bad. But this is the world we live in. So if we adopt an approach to political economy which is more like this, more analytical, where theory play an important role, where it's about, identifying distortion and fix it, when it's about being prescription, but being more prescriptive about how you should design government so that those policies can be implemented. If it's like this, then I think we can clearly make political economy what it's supposed to be, which is, in fact, a central element, central component of development discourse. Yeah. So, and I mean, to finish, so as I told you earlier, and I think for science and technology and stuff, I strongly believe that it cannot just be government. I'm not just to wait for the president of Congo, to think about whatever. I'll do it. Or people like me should do it, and to mobilize their energy, their network, so that this happens. That's why I like the story of Abdul Salam, who says, he set up a space program in Pakistan, he set up Trieste, and he has not been celebrated well enough. And I think, and this is what I'm trying to do, with African School of Economics. So, and I'm setting up a research hub with these 5 areas: economics, political economy, biotech, agriculture, climate and sustainability, applied math, data science, AI, and art and history. And there will be this kind of mass plant institute type model across many countries in Africa. Like these are the places. This is Nigeria, this is Morocco, South Africa, and Tanzania. And then as of yesterday, maybe Namibia, maybe Ethiopia. So anyway, so life is good. Thank you very much.
So we've got some time for questions, additional questions. So who would like to kick off with some questions? Yes.
So I'm just trying to understand more about the deliberation.
Yeah.
that you touched on. So it sounds like it's a platform. Sounds like more of like an intellectual discourse rather than a platform where you can vent your anger or frustration if something is not going right. And so, what is it about? Is it?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. So, I think that's a great question because it's a waste of opportunity when we turn deliberation into just, come tell me how angry you are, like, I mean, yeah, it's a waste of opportunity. This is basically your point. So that is a form of deliberation that you can follow, but the one that I'm proposing is one where there is a structure, one where you come with information that we can all more or less agree on, and then we talk, and then the goal is to reach some kind of consensus, to reach some kind of common, whatever. You see what I mean? So don't tell me how angry you are, don't insult. Tell me your preferences. Can we negotiate? Can we talk? Can we reach something? You see what I mean? So the point here, and but then deliberation is a big idea, but the form is going to take, the nature of the game, the structure, it's something that can vary from one location to another. Like, for instance, if I want to do the deliberation in northern Nigeria, for instance, I might say women will speak first because there are mechanisms of social control for women, and I want them to set the agenda. Or, for instance, I can say, because the crowd is very large, only few people can speak, let's have a vote at the end, so that we have a summary of what people really want. You see what I mean? So that's why we need a revival of theory, because then you can say, you can tell me if this is the kind of problem that you want to solve, voting is critical, and so on. You see what I mean? So I'm just sort of opening an opportunity also to think creatively, constructively about how to use deliberation to solve this problem, because I think it's vastly underused.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, thanks. This is sort of leading on the previous question.
Yeah.
The question is about scale.
Yeah.
Because you're right, you do have this kind of long tradition of kind of deliberative political cultures, but most of those are at sort of sub-national level.
Yeah.
Africa, right? And they vary a lot within each country. So
Yeah.
Nigeria, even a small country, will have lots of different ones.
Yeah.
I mean, is this something that works better at a local level, but is it difficult to scale up to, say, national policy, where, intrinsically the number of people you have in the room is going to be quite limited.
Yeah.
Kind of so which level?
No. So short answer. This is why theory is very important, because give this to a theorist and he will tell us how this should work. So national level, for instance, you might have two layers of communication, where there is some preliminary stuff, and then another level something, and then there is a decision, and there are real world examples, like the national conference in many Francophone countries, where it's exactly national level stuff. But then the question that they discuss, the kind of debates, is very different. It might be different from like public good provision. It's very practical. Over there is about some kind of key institutional feature. Should we vote election or not? Should we have PR or not? This is the kind of big decision that can be made. But so it's a big enough concept, and then we just need to think how adapt it nationally, locally, to the kind of problem that we want to solve. But again, it's not one size. It's not. It needs some degree of creativity into how you actually get it implemented. But then, it would be great next time, for instance, to look at, like national deliberation experiments and to see what makes them different from others and what makes it successful and stuff.
Okay, no, I got
Sorry.
Devesh, Bishnu, Sasha, and then at the back. So the next four are set up. Okay, Devesh.
Next four are set up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just two quick points. Parliaments are a very good example of deliberating institutions where represent. And there is now a new paper showing that women in the UK speak less in the question hour.
Yeah.
So I wonder, in such a country, when women are participating less, what will happen in other societies? How useful is this deliberation platform for everybody to speak up? Second thing is, deliberation is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Early philosophers from the UK, Stuart Mill, and others, they're talking about, or Habermas on deliberative democracy is good, but then there are papers by, political scientists like Stasovage and others showing that it could backfire completely.
Yeah.
So it could become a very risky gamble where somewhere it's working, somewhere it's not working, and we don't have a coherent theory of understanding where and why it should work.
Yeah. Great question. So two things. So first, for women, I'm just going to give one example in Benin. So women in Benin, when we did the experiment in elections, they anticipated exactly what you said. You know what they did? They met before the deliberation session and then debate, agree on everything, and appoint somebody to talk on their behalf. So while the men were going several directions, the women have clear agenda, specific, and they were more powerful because they have better coordination. So what I'm saying, you can allow, for instance, for variation in the way it's implemented to enable this to work. Now, in terms of, I mentioned earlier that obviously to do a deliberation, you need a survey, for instance, to understand the degree of polarization. You need to find a way to massage the differences. You can get people to agree on a number of things before the deliberation takes place so that there is a starting point. The problem that you raise, what I'm saying, can be thought about beforehand and solved. So because in the balance, clearly the risk of the status quo is much worse than the value of bringing this kind of coordination device and stuff. And I will cite the work of Fishkin, that shows that even when you put Republican, Trumpian, and Bernie Sanders people in a room and you lock the door, they talk for a while, they agree on something.
One comes alive.
I'm sorry?
Only one person comes alive.
Come on. Nobody have died for that. So but the point here is that it can be solved. But then again, you need to think creatively about how you do it.
Okay, Bishnu.
Yeah, so does the government, the central government need to set the agenda? So if you just think of the local level, one local government can decide on education. They want to create, they want to have physicists. Others can just say, let's just get rid of the rich farmers and go and expropriate land. So can each sub-community set their own agenda and get chaos, or is it a central planner, whoever, government, who needs to set that agenda and then have deliberations?
Yeah.
It seems to me there's an analogy with the corporatist bargaining structure of unions, where you set the wages, and not that each union sets its own wage.
Yeah.
The centralized system seems to work. So I don't know how.
No, but okay. So I think those are fantastic points. So that, and again, that's what we refuse to tell us that when you have this degree of polarization, when you have a degree of whatever, then this is a design that will help For now, you might need some pre-play communication, you might need some bargaining, you might have clarity, and people agree already, and having a pre-deliberation social contract, so that you make sure that it doesn't blow up, So, but when people are not talking, when people are not engaging, when people are, it cannot work. So, it's as if we have no real option other than thinking about a form of engagement. It can take, that we call deliberation, but it could be milder, it could be stronger, but it just shows how it's critical that the game form is properly thought about, Like, I think in the case of Benin, and even in the case of Nigeria, the fact that I said mayor is not there, the fact that it's closed door, it was important. Because intuitively I thought that you need to just get people to speak out, you need to get people. So those details are really, really important. But, obviously I agree with you that, you might want the central government to take agenda. It could be part of the constitution. I wish that the African constitution, for instance, have deliberation provision all over. Because it's part of the culture. It's something that people do. But then people copy and paste France. I would like to copy and paste some.
Yeah. Okay, Sasha. You had a question, right?
Trying to think in what situations what you propose is realistic.
Yes.
Even in the context of private enterprise, like this university, deliberation is via committees. But that's also often a way to kick the can down the road. So unless there is someone really at the top who wants change for better, there is so many ways to just...
A camel is a horse designed by a committee. That's saying it came across recently. Okay.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like, even in a private enterprise, there is maybe even a common aim. The business needs to stay profitable, or you lose your job. So there's at least people have a brain understand that this whole thing will fall apart if we don't make profit.
Yeah.
But in a society, even bankruptcy of the whole country is not a concern to many people. So what's the incentive for people to engage outside the very local level where I can see it?
Yeah.
Of course, the critical juncture thing is there have been, like the German constitution after World War II, is, I think, pretty amazing, but it came on the back of absolute disaster.
No, I think you have a point. So I made it sound like the watershed moment, the critical juncture thing is not important, but in fact it could be important as well. Particularly, if, for instance, you need an agenda setting at the central level by saying this is where we are going, but then you figure out the details, So I think, but then I think to look at this very closely, I can also talk about similar stuff, like in South Africa, where they have the Truth and Reconciliation stuff, in Benin, where we have National Conference. So in many African contexts where the transition has been successful, even at national level, there was some deliberation. But deliberation is not going to go through the details about how much money to spend on schooling. It's about, let's agree on a direction, And then I think this has some agenda setting power that will make things at local level very effective. So, just to add to this, we should not underestimate the extent to which many of the major state failure in Africa is due to over-centralization, the fact that we are not leveraging this enough. You take a place like Congo, you see what's happening at national level and overall, and you see the resources, the people who are there at local level, but those people are completely disempowered. They are just victims, like, so even like the conflict in Sahel, for instance, like you have people, with motorbikes creating havocs because the local government, they have no accountability, they have no decision-making power about security, all these things. So sometimes the incentive at national level is obvious, but then there is massive failure at local level. So there is still a value to think about along those lines, but I agree with you that it's important to have something coherent, something properly organized, and this has to be at the national level as well. Yeah.
Okay, I think in the back corner.
Yeah.
Did you have?
Francesco?
Oh, behind you. Yeah. Next to Jane. No, you didn't have that question. Did you have a question?
Oh,
No. Okay, so Francesca then.
okay. So thanks for making the point about theory is useful. But
Oh, come on.
I want to make a point that is very clear to me. Theory would be much more useful if theorists listen to empiricists and to people like you presenting important practical problems to solve.
Exactly.
It's not just enough to say we study deliberation as a mechanism. We have been studying deliberation as a mechanism. But the literature sort of stopped after a few results were found in a very constrained setup that would not be appropriate to answer the question that you just posed.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if we want to design deliberations, several ideas came out just from the discussion. I mean, what should they be about? I mean, what type of decisions can we decide by deliberation? What type of format should we have? Should we have a vote at the end or not? I mean, these are all important questions. Should they be at the local level? Should we have deliberation among representatives? Mind that all these questions came out from this audience. And I'm sure that if we can put our mind together, we can come up with several more important questions. So what is important for us, theorists, is that we listen to these practical requests. This is what we should be working on. Because, okay, fine, theory is useful. For example, we know that tariffs are no good. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the places where theory can be useful. We also know that overspending leads to inflation. I mean, there's a number of things that theorists have formulated by careful modeling and analytically solving models that have been vindicated very important. Now, you're telling us we have an environment with very practical questions that you should help us work on. I mean, I would like all the theorists in the department to be here and listen to this.
Thank you very, very, very much. I think, I cannot agree with you more. So it's not just like, empiricists not paying attention to theory, to mechanism. It's also theorists to be able to narrow down questions that are important, that need answer. Because if you just go, very quickly become very axiomatic, where you go in every directions and you have some neat results. Yeah, exactly. No. This, and I think. I think there need to be this kind of dialogue where we listen to each other, we help each other, and this is why I'm very excited about this, because, I would like the sense of empowerment when I say, I might have a solution for you. I'm not sure that it's going to work, but I'm going to say something that I have thought about, and if this is what we do, then for a PhD student in the class, in this, it's always a worthwhile kind of experience. Academics is always a worthwhile experience. When I hear students in my department say, well, because we haven't talked enough about how this process not only is great for society, but great for ourselves. Be able to say things.
Okay, I think Claudia.
Yeah. So it's just following up on Francesco, actually, when you mentioned that it's
may be a problem with the institution, not with the mechanism, and also following on what Sasha said in terms of what the institution wants, if they are interested in change or not. I work in an institution, and oftentimes I'm able to identify problems, but I'm not able to solve them because I either jump into institutional constraints, or an institution or an organization is a set of people, and sometimes the problem is the people. So the issue is, what do? If we can have the goodwill of getting together, getting our minds together, getting solutions, but oftentimes the barriers are the people or the institutional constraints. If the institution says, there's a hiring freeze, there's nothing we can do for you, there's no more money for you this year, what can we do?
Yeah, okay. So, okay. Sometimes that's the opportunity. Like, for instance, now, if we are solution driven, like, for instance, currently with the attack on higher ed, so, maybe it's the time to rethink how we engage more effectively with corporations. How we made this kind of partnership between corporations and research, so that I'm not just talking about government, the private sector, there are practical issues that we solve, and in return, and, in development in particular, we can kick out, if we're opportunity to kick out those kind of international development consultants who are getting all the money, but have no idea what they are doing, So what I'm saying, I'm just trying to promote a mindset, and I'm not saying that I really have things figured out completely, but we need the mindset. We need to be general, like, for instance, when I take the local government official who is trained in political economy, work in whatever, there are things that he can say, let me figure out how to do it. Let me try it, as opposed to just waiting there looking for instruction, So, and then we need to teach ways of people to be creative, to be imaginative, to be able solution driven, Anyway, I'm not saying this is going to happen overnight, but I think this is very important. And political economy is actually designed for that, and this is why there needs to be a push to make it more like this than just either descriptive or purely speculative. Yeah.
Okay, last question. Yeah.
Okay, maybe more on the science bit. I like your contribution on the importance of scientists.
Yeah.
I can give examples from my own village.
Yeah.
But I guess, do you think that it works the other way around in terms of scientists leaving a particular place? Especially in the context in many African countries where sometimes the scientific class tends to leave after a very short period of time to somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that can have the same inverse effect of destabilizing governments and basically doing the opposite of what scientists coming to a place would do in terms of the scale of its impact?
Yeah, okay, two things. So first, I believe that we need to reframe this kind of brain drain stuff, Like, I was telling someone the other day that I have so many people from my cohort who are better than me, but they have been wasted big time. If I didn't have, if I didn't escape, you'll remember, not remember, but you imagine what I would have been. We don't talk enough. Okay, when I left Benin, I'm nowhere near what I am, So, but then now when people see me, they say, well, he was a brain then, and then was drained, No, I was not brain then, I was not, I was actually completely wasted, So it's really important that we really think of creating conditions locally, for scientists to operate and to work. The worst is that some governments, in fact, hire foreign scientists to do things that local could do, even cheaper, more effectively, So I think investing locally and giving space to scientists to operate, and encouraging them to build networks, to build collaboration internationally, so that regardless where they are, they can still contribute at the highest level. I think that should be the approach, And if you think of Nigeria, for instance, there are models that you can put in place so that somebody like you, it doesn't matter, you'll be as effective where you are as you are in Nigeria, because you have the connections, because you have a place where you can actually be able to make an impact. And this is something that we can think about, and it's not just going to be the government, it's us. We can, as a group, think about how we can be effective, even regardless where we are, And if we can create a parallel path for science to matter, even in the absence of government support. And that's possible. That's possible. It's happening in many countries like Brazil or Ethiopia. Look at the situation in Ethiopia. But then yet they have space program. We have the top airline in Africa in agricultural science. So what I'm saying is that some countries have managed to insulate science, excellence in science, from politics. It's something that we can learn from. So what I'm saying, the problem that you raise, it's something that can be solved, and it's not just going to be government, it's going to be us as well. Yeah.
Okay, James, do you want to move the vote of thanks?
So the first thing I should do is thank you for giving a keynote address. So thank you.